Welcome back to Ambivalent Offenders. Welcome back to our show, Ambivalent Offenders, re-examining history's most infamous figures. I'm Jamie, one of the co-hosts here, and my other lovely co-host is my twin sister, Erin, who I'll let herself, again, introduce herself in a minute for those who are new to our podcast. And for those who are new to our podcast, also a quick note about our show. Our main goal here is to re-examine the various historical figures. I'm going to take Erin's quote because she said it so well in our previous episode, who live in the gray areas of history. So we want to wrestle with metaphorically. I want to
sometimes literally. I don't know. I'm looking at you, John of God. I wouldn't mind wrestling with you, literally.
I can say today for Nixon.
No.
I don't want to.
Definitely metaphorical.
Alive or dead. Alive or dead. I don't want to wrestle with him, but we want to wrestle with those figures who've been seen typically in a negative light. Although, as I said previously, if you listened to episode 1, we sometimes will take on a figure who's managed to have a positive reputation despite maybe some problematic things. So our biggest thing is, where do we think they fall kind of in history's judgment? Have they been fairly or unfairly vilified in the historical kind of discourse, kind of how people talk about them? So we kind of could boil it down, as I said previously, judging the hell out of some pretty interesting dead people. So last week, Erin covered John Dudley. Erin, do you want to say anything briefly about yourself and kind of quick little snapshot or your feelings about how that went, or just thing in general?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Erin. As Jamie said, I'm her twin sister. I'm also a lover of history, although it isn't something that I continue to study after school, but I do a lot of reading, listening to history podcasts, studying it in my free time. In terms of our previous podcast, our first podcast on John Dudley, loved it. It was great. Got to talk about an old dead European male, which from the medieval times. So that's kind of my dream.
I guess the question we need to ask: would you metaphorically wrestle with him?
Yeah, I was gonna say kill, marry, fuck. Is that the ultimate question?
What kind of wrestling would you? That'll be our every show.
Metaphorical. I think I heard literal. I mean, he had. What did I say? He had 13 kids. He had to know what he was doing.
I do want to wrestle with.
No. Yeah. Oh, that's true. But I still have good feelings towards him. So I didn't come out of it feeling like that. I felt ill of him. So I think he's very much one of those complicated men who I think completely fits within our ethos of what our podcast is all about. So yes, would wrestle with him physically, not just, and metaphorically. It was fun. It would be fun either way.
Okay. So yeah, good to know. So
now, drum roll, it is Jamie's first episode leading on. Yeah, first episode.
Huge disclaimer here. I want to say right off the bat, I didn't start this podcast becoming a Nixon apologist. Nor am I trying to rehabilitate him with.
I did not see us defending Nixon on our 2023 bingo card. The light comes at you fast.
Yeah. He wasn't even on our initial list. And for some reason, that I really knew nothing about Nixon besides Watergate and a few other little things that I'll mention. But I wanted to challenge myself and learn more, because I'm like, okay, is he somebody who we could fit on this podcast, or again, is he one where the door's been closed?
You can completely write off.
Yeah. And then it ended up being more complex than that. But I do want to say, just from my bias standpoint, I'm a very, very solid girl. And that's a specific shout out to my husband, Matt, who's also a history teacher. And I'm a little terrified to have listened to this podcast.
Yeah, I said I said, depending on how it goes, he may or may not be banned from listening to this episode.
I don't. Here he's gonna
That's what we get for covering an American figure.
Yeah, he unfortunately is an American history teacher.
Now you know why I stick to dead Vietnam.
And I know he was a bit horrified to hear I was covering Nixon based on Aaron.
Yeah. I think he has said afterwards, however, that he has elements of a tragic figure, and
yeah,
I think this is good. And we're getting, as we get further away from him, I think it gets harder to, it both gets harder and easier to evaluate him because we don't have the immediate, we weren't there. Yeah. But also I feel like it's easier to excuse people as you get further away from it. So I think we'll find that out.
Yeah. But we also have gotten so many more horrific politicians.
Yeah, that also helps.
It's like, what scale are we judging him on?
I know. I think like maybe 10 years ago it would have been a different thing. But then here we are. We're about to say some kind of nice things around it.
Well, we'll see. So, like the purpose of this podcast, I wanted to add some complexity, weigh the real person behind these, historical offenders. So is he ultimately misunderstood, even just a little bit? This was something I wanted to set out for myself, as I said, really coming into this research with little knowledge on him. Just letting you know, really, I only knew the negative. So I was really wanting to dive into the weeds here. And I discovered a whole lot that I didn't know. So I'll start there.
Also, this might benefit a new podcast because maybe we'll get sponsored by like the Nixon Foundation. So there might be some added benefits. So maybe next, who needs HelloFresh and some of that when we can get the Nixon Foundation monies. Just saying.
Any of them, if they want to jump in to sponsor,
we're happy. We're happy to give anybody's money.
No, we're complex as well. Really, at the end of the day, I wanted to determine, if the things that I knew, Watergate, guarding the war on drugs, as well as kind of really the beginning of the Southern strategy, which if you don't know what that is, don't worry, I'm going to get into that. Whether that wiped away any of the positives from his administration or, just kind of how they weighed against each other. I mean, descriptions of him these days really are never positive. He's been hit with some pretty intense labels. As I was doing my research, petty comes up, racist, corrupt,
paranoid.
One New York Times article, which I'll link in the note, I looked at, labeled him America's quintessential political villain, which makes sense with him being the only president to resign with huge bipartisan support, right? The idea, again, in today's world, imagining any politician resigning in both parties being like, you need to resign is like pretty remarkable. So not a great starting point. But before we simply place him in the villain category, let's learn more about Nixon, the man and the politician. I was telling Aaron, ironically, I'm wearing a sweatshirt that says electoral. It's kind of funny.
You're signaling your support. We get it. Again,
doesn't say elect Nixon.
Money. That Nixon money.
Doesn't say elect Nixon or anything like that. It's fair. So how I'm going to go about my episode, it's going to be formatted a little differently than Aaron's. First, I'm going to give a short, I say short, but, still going to be fairly detailed biography of him prior to taking over the presidency. So him prior to the presidency. And once I get to him as president, I'm not going to do it chronological. It's more going to be into two pieces, kind of the accomplishments of his administration, like we could say the good, and then, of course, the scandals, the ugly, things like that. So let's get started. Obviously, the beginning, early life, baby Nixon. You don't get to say that a lot.
I know, baby Nixon.
Baby Nixon. So Richard Milhouse Nixon, he was born on January 9th, 1913 in Yorba Linda, California. He's the second of 5 brothers, with God bless mother.
I know, I'm crossing myself. Oof.
No. And I'll shout out to our friend Erin, who has 3 boys. I'm sure the thought of 2 more would send her up to the edge. He was a Quaker, which I had no clue. Didn't know that.
Did not. Yeah. For some reason, I guess I did know Quakers still exist. I suppose I still know that. But then also there's something about Quakers.
Yeah, he just
so goodly.
Yeah, like
not Nixonian at all. But
no, it doesn't seem to fit with his
ether.
Like
who he is.
Yeah. He did have some tragedy in his early life. So kind of two tragic events that happened were his younger brother Arthur died at 7, and then his older brother Harold died at 24. So there's some early death that he has to face at an early age. And these young deaths of his brothers, as well as really financial hardship for his family, they were really barely scraping by. They had a citrus farm previously. These are like key driving points of his early life. That's the biggest thing I took away. And again, if we're talking from a political standpoint, he really is that, I don't want to say rags to riches, but he is.
He's not a Kennedy. He's not from a patrician. He's not from a patrician Eastern family that had a role in politics already. But he is kind of out of nothing.
Right. He's certainly not poised to be a major player on the political scene, like from birth, like George Bush, Yeah. Born into it. By 1922, the citrus farm they had failed. And so they moved, still in California. Whittier is where they moved, closer to his mom's family. And his family's still barely getting by. They're running a grocery store / gas station. Nixon and all his brothers worked there during their childhood. He's not coming from family money to go to college and to do all these things. But as we fast forward again to his early young adult life, as we kind of move forward, he really is that image of the self-made American man, living the American dream, and putting the asterisk there because at the time period, we're talking about a white man, right?
Very convenient that the white man can, they can do anything that they want to do at this select time in history.
Yes. But
again, when buying a house and going to school costs like $50.
Right. Still, for him, again, if we're comparing against other future presidents, this is a fairly different type of story for different type of background. And he was really gifted academically. He excelled first at Whittier College, and then he went to Duke Law School. He gets married to Patricia. He has 2 young daughters. And really the next big significant part of his life is he serves in World War II as a Navy lieutenant commander in the Pacific. And just a side note with this, because as you're weighing who he is as a person, he actually could have sought exemption from the draft, one, for being a Quaker, because he was born into, he wasn't just changing to be a Quaker to try to...
Yeah, like a religious exemption.
Exactly, yeah. And he also could have sought one because he was actually working in the U.S. government at the time. So he worked for the super fun-sounding Office of Price Administration. Would love
that.
Yeah, but he didn't. He decided to serve. And during
FYI, I'm just thinking of the Price Administration, like that it's just like the people who put prices on like fruit and things. Yeah. This is a stamp. The Price Administration.
Yeah.
That I'm going with that. I don't tell me otherwise. I know. This is where my husband Matt's gonna afterwards. He's gonna tell me exactly what the Office of Price Administration is for, and he's going to tell me, but I don't want to know. That's what's in my head.
Yeah, Nixon's like, get me out of here. I don't want to be no more price.
I mean, I can understand that. I would want to go off to the excitement of World War II after putting one too many price tags on a orange and or apple.
Yeah. He's pretty celebrated for his service. He gets 2 letters of, high pronunciation. What
commendation?
Commendation. That was been something. Then I was like, no, they're not condemning him. So, but there's something about how he served. Like he was, again, he served and he was given some sort of. The people thought that he was brave or had some sort of, that he obviously was service.
Yes, he was no, oh God, now I'm doing common. I was going to say condemned, commendated. I don't know if that's an actual verb, but no, it does say something that not everybody who served would have received that kind of comment. Now every time I say it, oh God.
Another thing I didn't know, so now we're getting into his political career. I didn't realize how actually, when you think about Nixon, and as I talk about later, like his political career ends up spanning a long period of time for a politician on like the national stage, as in like he runs in 1960, right? As I'm going to talk about, and then he doesn't run again, but ends up winning. He doesn't run again for a while, loses stuff, and then comes back and wins. That's pretty remarkable. But after the war, he wins. So his first congressional seat in California, where he serves one term. So he only serves one term as representative in the House of Representatives, which I had no clue that.
Because did he not get reelected?
Nope. What to know about him as a representative, again, there's some sketch. This is where we get in some of the stuff. That first, though, we'll start with the good. He does help in a committee that eventually helps get the Marshall Plan passed, which is going to help rebuild Europe post World War II. But he also joined the House Un-American Activities Committee.
Oh no!
Which is, if you're not familiar, famed for Joseph McCarthy's witch hunt, basically to find communists in the government and in Hollywood. And
yeah, a lot of people think of it in terms of the Hollywood part, where there's blacklist people who are blacklisted because they're supposed communists.
Right. And so it's ugly, right? It's not
something that you want to be aligned with, especially now.
Red Scare, right? He's definitely a part of that.
But I can imagine that might be, in short term, it might be good for his exposure. Yes. But long term, obviously, the idea of the HUAC committee is the further you get from it, there's more judgment passed on it.
For sure. And that is, again, pretty much exactly what you're saying. He wins a victory in the House with a bill that would require all Communist Party members to register. Yikes, right?
Yeah.
But it ends up failing to pass in the Senate. But it gets him some, I don't want to say notoriety, but it gets
exposure for somebody.
First term member like that.
You still see that now. I mean, you get more now. Social media, it's easier to do, but this is the way. Otherwise, how are you as a one term,
right?
Representative from California? How else are you going to be on the national stage?
Right. So villainous, again, certainly not good, but also time period, Cold War, Red Scare. This is fitting for the time. Not that.
Yeah, he's not the only one who's doing this, which doesn't exactly excuse. But it isn't strictly Nixonian. It's just he's getting in while the getting's good in terms of the Red Scare.
Yeah, he's jumping on it, especially kind of those fear politics, which is going to come up in this next.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I think that I wonder if this is sort of the beginning of where again, he's not the only one who's learned that fear is a good motivating factor in electoral politics, but I think it's a potent early lesson.
It is. So again, he serves only one term there, and then he actually enters the Senate in 1950. So jumps up to the Senate. And this campaign is where the first time you hear Tricky Dick as the nickname, because he tries to paint his Democratic opponent as communist sympathizers. So he's using that playbook. If you're a Democrat, you're okay with these communists, you're aligned.
Yeah. We know that playbook. That playbook is still out there.
Yeah.
It's a well-loved playbook.
Interesting enough. Now, he is, though, more savvy as he enters the Senate and just kind of as a politician in general. As I said earlier, while he seemed aligned with Joseph McCarthy and the House Un-American Activities Committee. He's friendly with him, McCarthy, but he's politically savvy enough to also keep a distance. Like, he's not best bud. He's not totally aligning himself with McCarthy. There is that distance. So
I think that is, at least from what I do know about him, and that again, but sort of more like little snapshots, the usual thing that you learn when you learn about Nixon.
Yeah,
I think that is something that he deploys even in his presidency, and it is something that you still see with Republican politics, where you're trying to have sort of both sides. You are right to get, you're trying to get the moderate vote. So you're appealing to moderation while also not being entirely moderate.
Right. Exactly. Like, he's not going to say anything bad about McCarthy, but he's also not necessarily going to jump in his ship and go hardcore and fall like McCarthy will.
Well, and he's obviously feeling well, and he at least likes him enough that he was part of the committee, and that he's going to use his politics to potentially win the Senate.
Right, which he does. So foreign policy is going to be something that's going to come up again and again. Foreign policy is what Nixon's known for as a kind of his, I guess, in his wheelhouse, like his expertise. So his foreign policy kind of platform is ending communism's global control. Again, makes sense for the Cold War, that idea of that domino effect. And other parts of his platform, he was a big critic of Truman's handling of the Korean War. And he actually does show some early support for civil rights, which is interesting. So Nixon ends up winning the Senate seat in 1950 using those different strategies.
I don't know, for a second, I was like, "Oh, yay!" But then I was like, "Oh, it's Nixon."
Yeah,
I forget. I like this isn't our guy. This isn't our guy. We need
a little bit. It's a little weird. So just keep in mind, this was the part that kind of blew my mind thinking about him as a politician. So he served one term in the House of Representatives. Now he's in the Senate, and just 2 years into his Senate term, Eisenhower asked him to be his running mate. So take a guess how old he is.
I would expect, you're thinking, a man who's held office, usually thinking maybe in his 40s, 45. You're thinking solidly. Yeah, I want to say middle age, because this is where I'm not going to say, how dare you.
But 45 was what I was thinking. But I guess when I thought ran as vice president, that again, he had political office for a while, and he was solidly,
you expect a man of solid experience and solid life experience.
If he's only 39.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's big. I mean, knowing that we're 34.
And that's
I'm a baby. You can ask me to run for your running mate.
Yeah, and I'm just blown away because, again, he's barely held public office.
Yeah, and also he usually doesn't come up in that conversation of people who are young who've held office. So you usually hear Teddy Roosevelt,
right?
JFK,
right,
etc. You don't think Nixon,
or even Lincoln, where
true,
have that much,
or Obama. I mean, Obama, in terms of his political experience, but maybe it is because Nixon's always looked like a 45.
I'm telling,
resting 45-year-old man.
He came out of the womb looking like Richard Nixon.
I mean, when your middle name's Milhouse, I think you're born a middle-aged man.
Yeah,
I
didn't look at young pictures of him purposely.
I don't know. Was he ever hot? I know. That's the problem.
Young Richard Nixon hot.
I remember. Have you seen? God, now we're totally getting off topic, but if you see old flash pictures of when Joseph Stalin was young, and he's he's so hot, and it hurts so bad.
No, it does. You're like, huh?
Yeah. You're like, he's got such a strong jaw. How can he? But evil. I'm Googling. Oh, when you Google young Nixon, for some reason, a picture of young Joseph Stalin does pop up. It's like they knew our mind. I don't know. Yeah, even as like, I think this is like his senior picture, and he looks like he's gonna sell you a mortgage.
This is not a Stalin situation going on.
No, we're not. But Stalin will also not appear on this podcast.
So they're not.
I think the only redeeming thing you could say about him is hot when young.
Yeah.
It would be a short podcast. That'll be one of our minis.
Hot when young. They're obviously not picking him for his good look, clearly.
Yeah, so why this dude? Like, I'm sure there's plenty of other dudes.
Yes. So there was a lot of political calculation that went into it. So one, he's from California, electoral votes, and that idea they could get California. He's got the strong stance against communism. Again, this is Eisenhower, just as the
so he wants those chopped. Yeah, but I guess this does show that his sort of courting the anti-communist part of the party while also sort of having arm's length that Joseph McCarthy that has paid off because that has gotten him to be the running mate. So I guess bravo.
And he's a young guy with a young family, and that, as I'm going to keep kind of talking about that American story, the kind of
So he Kennedy'd before Kennedy. Yeah, at this point he hasn't been out Kennedy'd.
Kennedy will come out soon.
I know,
but and it is a smart move because again he really is playing this everyman role.
Yeah, he has a good part of politics is having a good story, and he has a good story.
He does. Now, the first scandal that's going to hit Nixon, and this is always a funny one, and I remembered it once I started reading about it. So, while he's on the campaign trail, a scandal actually almost takes him down, and Eisenhower almost removes him from the ticket. So, it comes out there's a fund of about $18,000 by his supporters that was reimbursing him for his personal expenses. Now, he's going to deny it, which I'm going to talk about, and he'll say it's for political expenses, but what was it? Well, again, depending on
what you consider political.
Right. So Eisenhower really does have a choice because this is like 6 weeks before the election. Like,
oh, wow. I didn't realize it was that close to the election.
Right. So Nixon really has to get his shit together if he wants to stay on the stage, and he does by the famous Checkers speech.
I do know the Checkers speech.
I know.
Although I guess I didn't realize it was that close to the election, and I guess I didn't also comprehend quite how serious it was.
Right, because the Checkers speech in itself is hilarious. But
yeah, it's a funny, I mean,
anecdote.
It seems hilarious, but it does show some real concern.
Yeah, he's trying to think, but he goes on TV, so he uses the medium of television to basically save his ass. So he just defends himself on TV as this middle-class man. He goes through, again, his biography that I've already talked about. Literally, one he claims in literally the first sentence, a man of whose honesty and integrity has been questioned. Like, he's so angry that his honesty and integrity has been questioned.
We love a white man who is just angry that his integrity has been questioned. Kavanaugh.
How dare you? Yeah. Nixon doesn't talk about how he likes beer, but he does go into biography.
If it won him a state, he would have.
Yeah. He doesn't talk about beer. He's going to talk about checkers. So he talks about how he worked his way through college, how his early marriage was rough because they were, even after law school, he's barely getting by. Like, they're living in, he's even talking about details about how much his car cost and what kind of car he had, what mortgage.
That's brilliant. It's brilliant though. Like, in this day, even in this day and age, people don't believe that politicians know real money, what it feels like to be an actual human.
Oh, for sure. So he's
like paying his mortgage.
Yeah, he's like, this is our mortgage. Like, we live in the.
This would work. This would work now. This is.
Yeah, like
Come on, somebody I want a politician to get on TV.
Tell me
how much your mortgage costs.
Right. He's like, I don't drive a nice car, things like that. And kind of another famous part before the checkers part is he says how his wife, Pat, doesn't have a mink coat, but she has a respectable Republican cloth coat. And he says, to quote, because again, pulling back, really trying to show his everyman aspect, he says, but I also feel that it's essential in this country of ours that a man of modest means can also run for president because, remember Abraham Lincoln, you remember what he said. God must have loved the common people. He made so many of them.
Oh, I just hate this because it's so good. But like PR, I'm like this man, which again, it is so funny because when you think of Nixon, you think of him again being out Kennedy by Kennedy. You can't fight that beautiful face.
Right.
But this is. It is. Yeah, I think this is perfect. This is 100% perfect. Like, I don't think you could have made the speech any better, which I think is why it's so well.
He's on the ticket, yeah. And then, of course, we got you. For those who don't know why it's called checkers, you got to pull it back. So at the end, kind of, I guess, nail on the coffin for the Democrat. It's going to keep him on the ticket and help get him elected. With Eisenhower, he says nothing was used for personal expenses, only political. And he says, no matter what, he's keeping one of the gifts. So something was gifted to him. He didn't buy it with the expenses. Something was gifted to him. Mm-hmm. And he as we know, does the Cocker Spaniel. His daughters had named Checkers. Literal wolf.
Yeah. I hate it so much, but like, bravo. Like, hats off. Again, he couldn't have played it any better. Which
no,
this is like my thought.
You can take all our shit, but you're not gonna you're gonna take a dog from our
children.
They named Checkers.
I do wonder if the perfection of this and that it worked. I do wonder if it planted the seed in him that he'd get away with this. Like that he was. There's always politicians who do bad shit. They have to have a mentality that I'm smarter. I can get away with this. Nobody else can, but I can. Right. And I feel like perhaps
he kind of talk his way out. Yeah, he could kind of talk his way out of it.
It couldn't have been good for a man like Nixon to have gotten away with this.
Right. You can imagine the Democrat watching this and being like, fuck.
Yeah.
Because then it doesn't
well played.
Right. It makes the scandal not a scandal. It's like more attacking him for being, he's for having to use these political funds because he's not a millionaire.
Which is, that is something that we talk about nowadays. That is playing to, I love the idea of that. I love we should be having discussions about why do you have to be a millionaire or billionaire to run for office because it is so expensive. But I don't think we need to also in the same breath praise Nixon, especially knowing what he does in office. But like I said, hats off.
Right.
Him or whoever advised him. This is I'm not a PR person, but I don't think he could have played it better.
Thumbs up for the Checkers speech.
Yeah. So, and we do love dog. I'm not saying he should have given Checkers back. So yeah, I'm okay with this one.
Checkers. So there's his VP. I'm not going to really go into his vice presidency.
Nobody cares about vice president.
Yeah, let's be honest. But he's poised then, because Eisenhower wins 2 terms, he's poised to run for president, which he does. So he's first nominated for president in 1960, where he loses a close race to, as we mentioned, John F.
Kennedy.
Now, and this is, I guess, where you can see, in contrast with the Checkers speech, the TV aspect doesn't go right? Mm-hmm. Now, it's not the only reason, but obviously, most famously, and a lot of people talk about, the first televised debates, JFK, he's looked in a mirror, he knows
No, he knows he's hot.
You know,
you can't.
Kyle. He has that ease, right? And as Aaron had said, Nixon looks like he's trying to sell you a mortgage. He looks sweaty. He refused to wear makeup. And so he like looked extra pale and sweaty and nervous. So people, again,
Like, where are you hiding?
Yeah.
I do wonder, he worked the camera so well with the Checker speech. I wonder what happened here. Maybe just, I don't know, maybe just faking somebody as hot as JFK. Like, I'm sorry, like, unless you're like a screen god, unless you're like Cary Grant, you're not going to look good next to JFK. I'm sorry.
Exactly. So I think, again, it's not that he himself was horrible. It was just like in comparison to the young looking hot.
Yeah, a man who literally could be in Hollywood.
Right.
And he has the polish. He is the literal opposite of Nixon, where he's been raised in a family that, from the very start, a lot is expected of him. Patrician, this is the opposite. So I guess this is Nixon's nightmare.
Yeah, which is kind of funny because, again, before learning about this, it's not, like I said, I didn't know Nixon, super humble root.
Normally I'd be rooting for him,
but as I said, he loses, and typically, especially nowadays, we're pretty used to, you get one chance to run for president, right? If you lose, you're done. And that's why it's kind of interesting, because he loses and then he returns to the political stage shortly thereafter by running for governor of California, and 2 years later in 1962, he gets the Republican nomination, but loses again. So he's got two losses. And normally, again, this would seem like the kind of end of your career, or at least a decline, right?
And normally then it's like there's not really anywhere else to go.
Yeah, you typically you're not seen as a hot commodity.
You fade into obscurity.
Or you're writing books and things like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really interesting, but it's actually enough momentum, because nobody really thought he was going to win in California, but still kind of having his face known. It's enough to go into the 1968 election, where things are so bad. It benefits him, which we'll talk about. Obviously, we're in the Vietnam. LBJ is not going to be running. And
enough of a hot mess where he is a known commodity.
Exactly. He's like a safe bet, right? And actually, this was kind of funny. I didn't realize this. He refuses to debate the vice president incumbent, Hubert Humphrey. Shout out to Minnesota.
I know. We love ourselves a Hubert Humphrey.
I know. And this is also a really weird election, because George Wallace
also will not appear on this podcast.
No, definitely not.
He in hell.
Yep. He's that famous segregationist. There's nothing written about him. He picks up some electoral votes in the deep South. Shocker, right? Not that Hubert Humphrey was going to win, but it's interesting to see again a third party actually picking up votes, not going for Nixon. And we'll talk about during his presidency, he does have some, like, to be clear, some victories on civil rights. So
he's not a George Wallace. But,
so in the deep South, he's not seen as conservative enough. So Nixon wins comfortably. Now we have a Nixon presidency, and
everything goes great.
And I just think that that's a really pretty significant thing for someone, again, who lost the presidency in 1960, so 8 years prior, and then also the governorship of California. Like, he hasn't run for public office in 6 years. So it's just, to me, a pretty interesting and not a typical politician.
Yeah, and it does share a ton of similarities with our first guy, John Dudley, but the rise and fall of fortune, I think, you can see some similarity in that. And I certainly didn't, I knew that Nixon had lost JFK, but I didn't know too much about his political experience prior to becoming president. In history class, but usually don't encounter these individuals as they rise to the presidency. You don't get as much of the background.
Yeah, and so literally, he served one term in the House, 2 years in the Senate, and then again 8 years as vice president for Eisenhower. But
hey, he also worked in the Office of Price Administration. He's got government experience.
Does so he knows that what major player in the election. So his presidency, this is where I'm going to start breaking it down into I don't want to say the good and the bad, but I'll start with some achievements. So some things that you typically don't hear about tied to Nixon. So first, he founded the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, in 1970. This is where there was really starting to be concerns about pollution and conservation. And so that government agency comes about under the Nixon administration. So
surprising. That's not what you, especially considering recent memory where Republicans are trying to dismantle it. So not something you expect a Republican president to create. Right. There was, not that people weren't thinking about environmental concerns prior to the 70s.
It was kind of a renewed time.
Well, part of it is, even now it's talked about in terms of like civil rights and things, environmental justice and that kind of thing. So it makes sense that it was in the conversation around them.
For sure. Another big one that I had no clue was tied to him, Title IX, which if you're not familiar, that prevents colleges, discrimination at colleges and university for female athletes. So making that playing field, even though, as we know, still not perfect. As we know about at the college level, the collegiate level, female athletes versus male athletes, as we've seen in.
But that is,
right. But that
still surprising.
There's a federal law, right, that goes into effect. That's a big step, step in that direction.
You also don't think of Republicans in terms of regulations and
especially right now as we're talking about athletes, fighting against with that is like here the administration trying to prevent discrimination again.
So I mean you can't say that's bad, even if I'm sure he wasn't just doing it out of the goodness of his heart. But
as I said, his administration, so
not him. It's not just him, but he wasn't preventing it. So
he wasn't vetoing these things. The moon landing.
This one, I mean, we have to get. He was landing each. Yeah, he was landing each shuttle.
Exactly. Yeah, we use that mission control flag.
I mean, that's a lot for somebody who was president and then landing on the moon.
The Price administration came up with the first flight.
Yeah, this is so surprising.
He was so bored. He's like, you know what? I'm going to design a space shuttle.
I mean, I'm sure he had plenty of time to. I mean, this is Bravo. I don't know this for sure, but I would assume he might be the only person from the Office of Price Administration who's ever stepped foot on the moon. But don't call. But again, this is where my husband Matthew he is going to actually me. That's what I always tease him because. And even if he knows I'm just bullshitting and trying to mess with him, he can't help himself. So I know when he listens to this because he's gonna come in and say, "Actually,
don't actually me, Matthew."
And we know he didn't set foot on the moon. We are caveating this.
Nor did he write up the space shuttle
because some kid's gonna be quoting this and gonna be. They're going to be writing a paper on Nixon and they're going to just type in Nixon on their Apple podcasts and they're just going to listen to us. Don't do it. And also do your damn homework.
Do your own fucking research.
Yeah.
At least go to the articles linked in my research.
Yes. Don't listen to two ladies. I mean, did you just hear?
Oh.
No, I think I mean, I'm just saying, did you hear us talk about the Stalin and all that stuff? I think that should tell you, like,
Aaron's listening to too much about Nick. She's going too much on the Nick. Don't listen to
these ladies. If you're gonna learn about history, you learn it from an old man, not two ladies. Oh. So they're just gonna dog the lady stuff. I mean, to be fair, we have been judging that. We've been talking about each of these guys, how hot they are. So, I mean, I think we are settling in this field. It's a little bit
minor. But it is remarkable that the moon landings were successful under him, and obviously pushing.
Thanks to his plans.
Salute to Nixon.
Thanks, Commander Nixon.
I just see him sitting alone in the control. Like, but again, I know nothing about like that. I see basically like a video game like controller, like joystick, and he's
yeah.
No.
It would be with like the swelling music in the background, as he lands the shuttle.
Oh,
bravo.
Yes, but space exploration festival under Nixon, and another really big one. He's the supporter and helps push through the 26th Amendment, which lowers the voting age from 21 to 18, which expands our democracy, right?
Especially, don't love that 18-year-old shouldn't vote. No, that's not my hot take. I was just trying to be controversial. I don't know how I feel about that. But
it's like I've seen too many TikToks.
I have seen a lot of TikToks, and it does make me concerned about what our 18-year-olds are doing. But I know I was also very dumb at 18, so.
True, very true. Not just
you can confirm. She can confirm.
But placing it in a time period when the Vietnam War is still going on and you have 18-year-olds being drafted and not being able to vote, that's a key issue there.
No, I think that I think it does make sense, especially when you put it in context.
And again, contrasting with our current Republicans who are trying to shrink the democratic process and shrink who is part of that democracy, actually trying to expand it is a contrast.
No, it's only a little different.
And then kind of the last big thing is he is going to be the one who's going to really be, not that it's going to start with LBJ, Lyndon B. Johnson, but he's really going to oversee the federal desegregation of Southern schools. So just keep in mind, yes, Brown versus Board might have been passed back in 1954, but particularly in the South, but not just in the South, really true desegregation hadn't begun. And Nixon, these are Nixon's words on Brown versus Board when it was decided. He said it was right in both constitutional and human terms. So I just
love how like low our bar is for like, especially Republican presidents that we're surprised that we're like, wow, he says human term, board versus board, like, Brown versus Board. Oh,
I know. You're like, oh, like not only is he like, the Constitution, I guess means that, but he's like, no, this makes sense.
Yeah, I'm like, ooh, love. But no, I mean, I obviously, even if it wasn't started under him, the fact that he wasn't opposing it, even if I don't think necessarily, we know that he was a racist, a little bit of an anti-Semite, right?
But again, looking at my research, I have linked below in a 1991 New York Times article by Tom Wicker. Wicker writes that, this is quoting him, "There's no doubt the Nixon administration accomplished more in 1970 to desegregate Southern school systems than it had been done in the 16 previous years, or probably since." That's coming from 1991, so sense from that. But that's a pretty big statement. So, and if you're doubting whether Nixon, as I said, this is Nixon's administration, his own involvement in leading the charge, from that same article, it says there's no doubt either that it was Richard Nixon personally who conceived, orchestrated, and led the administration's desegregation effort. So
Nixon.
Pretty strong word there. That's obviously all on the good and the domestic side.
Oh, yeah.
So foreign policy, he's going to end America's involvement in the Vietnam War in 1973. Although, asterisk,
yeah,
to add this, especially because Matt.
Yeah, Matt's going to say, Cambodia.
No, I have to mention, he really pushed the boundaries of presidential power by invading Cambodia in 1970.
Are you happy, Matthew? We mentioned Cambodia.
But the biggest thing is he does this without permission of Congress. So if we're talking about the power hungry or the Nixon who is kind of taking control or doing what he wants by what's legal, this is actually going to push the 1973 War Powers Act by Congress. That's going to be we're going to have a check on your power. Kissinger under Nixon is going to also
exhale at the word Kissinger. Also, boo hiss. Also, not going to appear in our podcast.
I know some of these names probably but he does help negotiate treaties between Israel and Egypt and Syria. It was obviously a really tumultuous time, like many times with Israel and its neighbors. And Cold War, he's going to be starting kind of what we would say is the kind of de-escalation. So there's the strategic arms limitation talks and a slow melting of relations. And that'll come back later, especially with China. Post his administration, he's a big player in that, which I'll talk about. So now into the ugly. And again, this is just a summary. This is not a sprinkling. Yeah, this is not the full-on piece. So first thing, the war on drugs. He's pretty famous for really starting if you watch the documentary on 13th on Netflix, I would highly recommend. So that officially launches in 1971. And the biggest shift is he made drug a criminal issue versus a public health one, right? And of course, this is a political strategy. This is not shocking. And politically to target certain communities. So in 13th, and which 13th quotes from a 1994 interview, there's a top Nixon aide, John Ehrlichman. He gives a really revealing quote that I had to pull because it sums it up. So he says, the Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and Black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or Black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and Blacks with heroin and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt both communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Didn't we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did.
Dreaming into the void.
I mean, there's not much to say there. That law and order piece, a law and order president, he's going to use that terminology. Trump, right, ends up using it like that, leaves a legacy. And same with incarceration rate. So this is really where you start to see incarceration rates, of course, rise because you're criminalizing drugs, targeting certain groups, obviously decimating certain communities, especially communities of color and lower socioeconomic backgrounds. And we are still living with that legacy today. So
yeah, a really hard legacy to unpack everything that's led to it, but you can't debate that Nixon, especially in terms of the political side and as a political strategy. Yeah.
And knowing that they were
lying. Yeah.
I mean, but some respects you're kind of like, because you get so much bullshit from politicians, you're like, well, thank you for at least admitting.
Yeah.
Obviously,
but
hard giving you any credit. not giving you any credit for that. Now, with that tied in with politics and playing political game with the Southern strategy. If you're not familiar with that, when Lyndon B. Johnson signs the Civil Rights Act of 1964, he famously said that the Democrats had lost the South for a generation. And Nixon's campaign pounces on this. So Nixon's campaign manager, Kevin Phillips, and then the Republican National Committee Chairman, Lee Atwater, they both admit to using white resentment in the South to their advantage. Now, as we know, as I said earlier, George Wallace said the crazy thing is that there's plenty, at least in Nixon's first election, where the people are like, nope, he's too frugal. He's not conservative enough on these things. But especially in the second election, but they're still going to use it, right? So he does pick up states in the South using white resentment to their advantage. So this is kind of not the beginning by any means, but this is using, these dog whistle politics. Where they're going to use terms like local control or states' right. Coincidentally, when they're talking about federal policies that interact with any type of racial issues, whether it's busing, welfare, desegregation. Now, I said desegregation was something that was a success, but there's also, I'm talking about that in the school system, but as you're talking about communities and things like that.
Well, and I think what he's doing here is, you do see it a little bit in current politics is, it's not like by doing the desegregation, he doesn't have, or I don't think that they imagine that that's going to win them huge proportions of voters of color. But if they can skim a little bit off the top while also appealing to, the maybe white moderate in terms of the Southern strategy, it's like that's the electoral strategy to win. So it's a little playing both sides.
Oh, for sure. And especially at this time where there is so much upheaval, right? If you're talking about, 1968 into the early 70s, where you're having, Martin Luther King Jr. being assassinated, Robert Kennedy being assassinated, race riots, like in Vietnam, like all this stuff. There is so much turmoil. And so he's going to pick up on that and use fear, right, in this negative way to be like, well, especially as they're watching things on TV and stuff, really bring that fear and resentment when it comes to especially racial issues. And he's going to...
Well, also not being, George Wallace.
Right, explicit like George Wallace is. He's going to be using these different... He's not going to say, even like Trump, right, where Trump actually calls out Mexicans and groups.
Yeah, he's not going to use explicit language, but he's smart enough to appeal to both. Yeah, he's appealing to both sides.
That's what he's doing, all right? And it's really about bringing out those white voters. Particularly in the 1970 midterms. A lot of people bring these parallels to the 2016 election of Trump. Again, that fear, resentment, especially if the kind of less educated white voter.
You can see where at the end of the 60s going into 1970, that would be a perfect storm.
Right, exactly. And of course, water.
Oh, the most famous one.
I'm just, for those not familiar, very quick summary. So burglars are caught in June 1972 in the Democratic National Committee, the DNC's offices in D.C., which is located in the Watergate complexes. And they were stealing documents and bugging their phone. Burglars were connected to Nixon's reelection campaign, which... The biggest thing is Nixon is going to work famously hard to cover up. And it really actually works at first. So he gives a speech in August of 1972 that his staff was no way involved in these activities, and he's reelected in a landslide. Look back at the Checkers speech, right? Go on TV and you say, no,
same. Yeah, same playbook, same sort of thing. Right. It wasn't me, and I guess if trying to have plausible deniability, which I mean, obviously what we know, and the world soon knows soon after that speech that deniability is questionable.
So at this point, as I said, the public don't connect the burglars to his reelection campaign. But of course, the truth is going to come out because people aren't going to just step back and be like, oh, okay, right. Famously, you're going to have, Woodward and Bernstein, and there's a lot of other people who are going to be asking questions. So
Nixon, he's caught.
Yeah. So, and he paid a lot of money and hush money to the burglars. So he's like wanting them to shut up and not say anything. So not only as we're talking about crime, not only are they bugging, right, the DNC and stealing documents.
Now it's hush money.
Now it's hush money trying to cover up. And then now what's going to come next is the even bigger crime. It's a clear abuse of presidential power and obstruction of justice. So basically, he attempts to have the CIA sabotage the FBI's plan to investigate. So journalists Woodward and Bernstein famously are going to investigate, have their anonymous source. Everybody knows. Deep throat. Nixon has everything in the Oval Office recorded. And of course, people are like, well, we want to listen to the tapes. And he's like, what tapes? He's going to keep trying to just obstruct justice and try to slow
down. Like the ultimate, like the meme, like, oh, baby, what you doing?
Yeah. I mean,
everything he does just makes it worse.
Yeah. And it's like, he's trying to gaslight like everybody in the government.
And it almost worked.
Right. Well, it seems like in this case before where he would say stuff and it seems like things would fall into place. Yeah. Everything he does seems to make things work because they have an independent special prosecutor, Archibald Cox, and he's not going to back down, right? He's not going to be like, oh, okay, we won't take the tape. And then this is the famous Saturday Night Massacre occurs, which is basically the beginning of the end. So Nixon orders the special prosecutor Cox to be fired, and several Justice Department employees quit in protest because obviously they're like, you are her fucking coward. Fire somebody to not investigate you.
It's not even subtle at that point. I mean.
So by early 1974, it's really all crashing down. So a new special prosecutor indicts those close to Nixon on charges related. And at this point, the Supreme Court orders him to turn over the tapes. So again, being like, what tapes? At this point.
I do love the sheer gall of saying what tapes.
Yeah, I can't say that he actually said what tapes, but basically,
I know, but
he's pretty much like over my dead body. Are you?
Yeah, he wasn't like, yeah.
I mean, and again, the fact that you're like, no, you can't have the tapes. It's like, why?
It's like when kids are like, you can't go in here, and
right?
It's never for a good reason.
Oh, so if you had nothing to hide, you would have turned over the tapes in a second. So the House Judiciary Committee, they're going to vote to impeach him on 3 charges. Right? It looking real. The writing's on the wall. So he released the tapes.
Those damn tapes.
He releases them on
and it exonerates him. Everything.
They were actually just a bunch of him, a lot of singing in the Oval Office.
Yeah, it's weird. Yeah,
or like LBJ and ordering pants.
Yeah. Oh God. No, I have it like PTSD thinking about LBJ and damn pants.
Yeah. Facing not only certain impeachment, but also not only being impeached, but removed from office. Nixon he announces his resignation on August 8th, 1974. The first president to do so. In fact, he notes he's going to do it the next day to start what he calls that process of healing, which is so desperately needed in America. So again,
I just love that it's kind of like the process. Let's get the process of healing without but like the reason we need to heal it, from me,
right?
But that's a very guy thing.
But I guess in some ways you can say he didn't
prolong.
Yeah, like he could have
fight it.
like you could see again if this with Trump, it would be like, I'm gonna fight every legal battle. I'm gonna just
That's the fear. That's the ultimate fear.
right.
That would happen. But yeah, so you can give him a small amount of credit for seeing the writing on the wall and doing what was right in that, because at that point there wasn't any way around it. So.
Exactly. Like he shortened the inevitable. And Ford's gonna take over. His famous quote is, "Our long national nightmare is over." 6 weeks later, Ford's going to pardon him. Nixon is actually really reluctant to take it, but he does.
It's weird. I would have expected him to jump on that baby.
Yeah, I think being the proud man that he was he was just very reluctant to take it, but he does. And it also admits guilt,
Yeah, that is true.
And that was the big
but baby, you guilty.
And
I get you don't want to admit it.
Take that part. And then you and he does disappear essentially from public life for a long time. So he returns to San Clemente, what they call a broken man. He has some health issues, but he does slowly actually, and this is something I didn't know, he does slowly return to public life. And partially for financial need, which going back to what we were talking about, like he is not a rich. Well,
do you know how much his mortgage? Do you know how much his mortgage costs?
Yeah. But again, he
There's a famous dog. He requires a certain lifestyle.
Gotta bring home the money for Checkers. So he returns both for financial need. And I hinted at earlier about the kind of softening of the Cold War relations. He's going to really push for having a relationship with China. And what's really interesting is, again, I didn't know this, Reagan and George H.W. Bush actually both consult him on China. As I said, like foreign policy is his like forte. But surprise, surprise, they don't do that publicly. Hey, we're talking to Nixon here.
Nixon said, yeah.
Foreign policy kind of ends up being his kind of saving grace in his kind of later years. He dies on April 22nd, 1994.
Hey, we're recording this on April 19th. So cool. To the anniversary of his death.
And his funeral draws every living president comes. So, like,
he's not being scorned, but
yeah. And there's a lot of obviously other dignified individuals across the globe. Like he's buried as a president
with all the dignified nature that would present.
In a way, is pretty interesting. And I kind of want to leave, I guess, his story on actually Clinton's remark.
Also an amazing president. No downsides at all. At least not for, if we're talking about, we were saying Nixon died in 1994. I just wanted to tell the podcast audience that elementary school, Erin admitted in her elementary school diary that she loved President. And then the other page had about how much I loved my beanie baby Magic, who was the dragon beanie baby. So,
you love more.
Who knows? It's up in the air. But if anybody doubted our liberal credentials, Democrat then, Democrat now. Anyway, back to Clinton's remark.
Magic the Dragon.
I would like to hear what Magic would. I feel like he would have good insight into Nixon's reputation.
Fortunately, Magic the Dragon was not invited to.
He did not quote. We don't have his exact quote, but we'll try to find it.
He was probably in prison on drug charges. No. But anyway, Clinton's remarks were, "May the day of judging President Nixon on anything less than his entire life and career come to a close."
Thoughts, feelings, concerns. Yeah. I mean, I still, if I'm getting ultimate judgment, I can see that he is a complex man, and I do commend him from coming from relatively common stock and getting to the point of presidency. And I do not think that him corrupting the presidency, that's like a strictly a Nixonian thing. I think somebody would have come along and done something, perhaps not the same as Watergate, but
Not as dumb.
no, that's. But I don't want to. I think it's easy to get caught up and say, well, Nixon ruined everything, or act like he opened Pandora's box. No, people are bad. People can be bad, and I think that another president might have done something similar, or at least illegal. So, but it is really hard to come to terms with some of the most odious things about political life, like whether it's the Southern strategy and racial relations, using the dog whistle for racial relations, all the stuff that we hate in our current political environment, that seeing it come to fruition under Nixon was a tough pill to swallow. So that's kind of where I'm at, where I can see he did good things, landed on that moon,
The space shuttle.
yeah, like we got to commend him for that, but
Works in the office of Price administration. Who else is going to work there?
No one. I don't think that he's
the only employee.
Yeah, he made that office run. I don't know where the quote is, but I feel like he's less on the side of the angels and the saints, and I think he's on the other side. But I don't think, again, that we have to discount the good things he did. I don't know. Does that make any sense? I'm trying to reconcile this man. I mean, he is a hard person to summarize.
Right.
And there is something really tragic and pathos about him.
Yeah, I guess that was kind of that came out for me doing the research, not knowing kind of how his rise, political acclaim, I guess. Like,
you want him to be good. Like,
right. Like he has a good early story where you're like, okay, you came from these humble beginnings, you lost two brothers, you fought, you didn't have to fight in the World War II, you did. You had the commendation.
So many.
And
he was obviously a skilled politician.
Yeah.
Which is, there's, again, kind of something gross about to be a skilled politician, you have to be a little bit gross.
Well, and I think that's the hard part, like with his words with Brown versus Board, is like he said he agrees that it makes sense constitutionally and like humanely, human. And yet he's the same guy who's like, well, these groups of people aren't voting for me.
Mm-hmm.
No, these communities are more typical Democratic voters, whether it's people of color or the anti-war, young people. So I can't, as I said, they can't put them in jail for not voting for me or not being Republicans, but let's criminalize this. It's like, it's this really weird juxtaposition where you're like, how can the person hold those same?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess at the end of the day, to me, it's power, right?
Power corrupts.
Right. It's about, okay, well, these groups of people aren't going to vote for me. They represent the kind of opposite of what I see as the America that I'm trying to create. Really kind of the Eisenhower, this old vision, right? And being like, okay, we're just going to lock you up, like, basically.
Yeah. I mean, that is something that's particularly gross. And the thing about Nixon, too, is I think we talked a little bit about it at the beginning, like, as we get further away from him and there's less people who remember his presidency, I do fear that there will be a veneer, a shine over him, and we will start to forget, or we at least not emphasize some of the less commendable things about his presidency, and emphasize some of the good things. And I do fear about that, because I do think we can see the good, but I fear about discounting the bad and him being
well, it's almost like
accepted back into the pantheon of presidents.
Right. Well, to me, it reminds me a little bit of the George Bush piece.
Yeah.
or like, or even like John McCain, where it's like,
if only we had George Bush back. Yeah,
right. It's like you look at the Trump administration.
His origin story is better than the Trump origin story, but that doesn't mean that we have to turn him into a hero.
Right. Well, and that's the thing. It's like, okay, there were these big Title IX and yay and things like that, and those have lasting legacies. However, the same party is now like basically dismantling that.
They're also retooling his legacy and
leaning
into the bad parts and discounting the good.
Right. And the Southern strategy, I mean, what LBJ says, it's like, besides Georgia in this last election, obviously, and as we're seeing the map change a little bit, but this is really the changing of the map when it comes to the political parties. And leaning into those, like we had said, those dog whistle politics and fear politics and, things that a lot of people,
in terms of the fear politics, that's something that everybody hates. But I don't know how you exercise or get that out of our political system after it's been introduced. Anyway, I feel like we could talk. I know that we could talk about this forever, but I would be curious to see if people can share. Who knows? Maybe that there's Nixon Foundation or some intern at the Nixon Library is going to be like subtweeting us or something. But I would be curious to hear other people's take on Mr. Richard Milhouse Nixon.
Yeah, and let us know what kind of wrestling you would do with.
Maybe that should be our new subtitle for the podcast.
Is it metaphorical or real?
Yeah, I don't know.
That's actual.
Well, all right.
We will be back with Aaron taking the throne, probably on some.
There will probably be a throne involved, yeah.
Well then, we will talk soon.
All right, bye.